Well, hello, welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in from. Thanks for making a little time to join us for the program today. My name is Dave Cohen. I'm a director here at Mina Partners. We provide operational and IT security risk managed services. And we have a very exciting conversation in store for you today. We are going to be tackling the topic of AI and privacy and the intersection of those two technologies, governance management programs, etc. We're calling our topic Cookies, Consent, and Data Flows, examining the role of AI in modern privacy programs. And we've had some great preliminary conversations to tee this discussion up for you all. So we'll get started with that in just a minute. Before we do, a couple of quick program notes. We really like if you're listening to this live, we very much encourage questions. So please feel free to pop your questions into the function there in your interface, and we will take those as we go or toward the end as is appropriate. So we encourage you to share those with us. And also, we are recording this program, so if you're wondering about that, we will be posting the recording of the conversation probably later today, but by the end of this week at the latest. So with that, let's go ahead and move forward, and I'd like to introduce our two guests today. I'm very excited and pleased to have them here, starting with Timothy Yim. Timothy was most recently a senior privacy counsel over at Snowflake. Timothy, would you like to tell everybody kind of a little bit about your professional background?
Yeah, sure. I've been counseling on privacy for about 13 years from a number of different perspectives, from in-house counsel for publicly traded companies and startups, as well as outside counsel. I've also been in the privacy academic space I previously directed a privacy center at a law school.
Terrific. Excellent. Thanks. And really appreciate making some time for us today, Timothy. And joining Timothy and myself on the panel, Sam Alexander is a founding engineer and vice president of product over at Catch. Sam, thanks for being here today. And can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, of course. Great to be here and excited for this conversation. So I've been, through my role at Catch, been working with hundreds of different lawyers and engineers along the way, thinking through how to build the underlying fabric that makes privacy by design possible.
Fantastic. Appreciate that. Great. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the conversation. And Timothy, I'd like to start with you, and let's just kind of start from a place of, as we started prep for this program, we talked a lot about how at this point, privacy programs, privacy governance is, for a lot of companies, relatively mature. We're talking about a couple of decades now that processes, procedures, roles, technologies have been in place. So as AI technologies just in the last couple of years have become more prevalent and been in the spotlight, there's been a lot of pressure to utilize these technologies. A lot of the thinking about governing their use within companies seemed to fit logically and make a lot of sense to be placed as, at least in early days, on the privacy team, on the privacy governance team. So can you talk a little bit about how that looks like from an operational legal perspective? I know you've done work in product, et cetera, and just what are some of the effects that's had, and kind of what are your thoughts about whether that makes sense or doesn't make sense in terms of different factors for companies?
Yeah, definitely. I've seen AI governance be something that privacy teams take on pretty often, as well as sometimes in whole, oftentimes in part. When it's in part, it's often part of a cross-functional AI governance board or committee that involves other stakeholders like companies. That is going to usually involve your security teams and your product teams, security infra teams as well. The rationale is pretty simple on why privacy teams are usually involved and critically involved. Privacy teams have the best knowledge about where data is in a company, where that data is flowing to and where it's coming from, how it's being processed. And they generally should have a framework and operational tooling to track that processing, to track the risks associated with that processing, and to have some tracking for risk remediation and the life cycle for that remediation.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And, kind of building on that a little bit, I know when we over at Mino work with our clients and help set up or enhance privacy programs, the viewpoint and the perspective that the privacy office has is great, because there's direct lines to legal, marketing, technology, oftentimes human resources, if you're dealing with employee data, of course. And so having those relationships already built and being able to query those people about where those data flows are, and what data is being collected, processed, and what new technologies are coming on board, getting around to people adopting these AI technologies. So Sam, can I guess that you've had kind of the same perspective in terms of product development over there at Catch, and when you work with your clients and see how they're choosing to structure things?
Yeah, certainly. I think as we're talking with privacy teams and doing this for ourselves and internally too, all of the AI applications that are happening more and more are ultimately just another layer on the data processing that's already happening. And so typically we see that folks have a good handle on the data processing fundamentals that are happening within the organization. And this is just yet another application of all the data that's coming in. And so it seems quite natural, as people are thinking about their data maps and where data is flowing in the organization, that of course that has to include all of the AI awareness as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then digging a little deeper there, Sam, another thing we were discussing in terms of preparing for this program was the privacy programs themselves using AI. There's the AI governance, the having the privacy program help with governing the use of AI technologies throughout the organization. That's one thing we kind of want to talk about today. But then there's also, I just got a call from a client the other day, and I was discussing with her. She's talking with upper management, and their upper management is kind of charging her with evaluating what AI tools and technologies can the privacy program use itself to make the privacy governance function move smoothly and more effectively, and to save some time and to save some labor, which is of course why people are leaning on these tools. So what kind of examples have you seen, Sam, of companies using AI technologies in order to make the privacy governance function more efficient?
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally changing the game in terms of how data awareness is done at organizations, how data mapping is done. I think certainly anyone who's gone through the process of building out a ROPA report or just doing a yearly data map update, it's extremely time intensive. It's often a lot of conversations. There's a lot of manual documentation of various pieces.
Yeah.
But more and more, what we're seeing people able to take advantage of is all of the scanning tools that automatically scan the data collection points on websites, that look at the classifications of the data at rest, that scan for the systems that you have, and do that in a continuous manner. Because one of the refrains that we hear over and over again is that the marketing team is off doing great things, the engineering team is off doing great things, but the folks in the privacy chair may not know without some automated scanning tool that things are changing rapidly. And these various AI scanning capabilities, I think, is a huge piece, certainly in terms of risk review of assessments. I think we've seen a huge shift there, where folks are able to collect and analyze large amounts of data from the organization much more quickly. And then I think the last piece where we've really seen this come into play is with privacy policies and contract reviews, just ensuring that those are in line with the underlying data practices. And really that's a prioritization thing of which ones do we need to go and review first to ensure that the right thing is happening based on the terms of the contract and what data is flowing into that external system.
Yeah, that's great, Sam. That makes a lot of sense. And Timothy, I'm going to turn to you in just a minute and talk about, from a legal perspective, either from new product design or from just the functioning of the privacy program. I'm going to ask you to get your thoughts on the risk involved in implementing these AI tools to gain some of these efficiencies. But before I do, I wanted to kind of flag something now, and we'll probably be talking about it later. And that is, Sam, for anybody out there who's, working with implementing some of these technologies, having people, review committees, individuals, skilled individuals inserted at the proper point in the review process. You mentioned ROPAs, PIAs, assessments, et cetera, to do a human review after the machine efficiencies are gained is critical, and is going to be one of the ways to reduce risk. So kind of
Absolutely.
with that, and kind of building on that, Timothy, when you are sitting with your legal perspective hat on, within a company, trying to advise and trying to help the company minimize risk. I know that can be challenging. We talked a little bit about how lots of companies are chaotic, product rollouts. We all know the reality of that. They happen fast. Something's going out the door. It's like, wait a minute, hang on, we need to review this. Can you talk a little bit about how to think about legal risk when implementing these tools, and what are some of the things people want to be flagging, and what kind of structures people want to build around being able to evaluate that risk?
Yeah, definitely. The landscape for AI regulatory frameworks, legislation frameworks, the interpretation of regulations, and then code of practices is a rapidly evolving space.
Right.
I think those in the privacy space over the last 10, 20 years have realized that it goes much faster than most areas of the law, and the AI space has only accelerated that tenfold. So when thinking about how to create a responsible either privacy program that incorporates AI program governance or AI program governance on its own, I think it's really important to understand that, like privacy, there are going to be numerous laws that may apply to you to some extent or to a large extent in terms of where you're practicing around the world. Do you know that this applies to you or not? It actually can be an open question. And so in developing your internal compliance program, it's important to do things that are kind of generally responsible practices, because you'll see that even though the laws and frameworks are quite varied, they have a shared value and principle system. So you're going to be doing things that are very similar in the AI space to the privacy space. You'll be doing things like everything's going to be based first on having an accurate data map and an accurate dynamic data flow map. And that's exactly what Sam was referring to earlier. And these are critical pieces. Without these foundational pieces, you can't layer on all the traditional privacy and privacy program or AI program governance kind of pieces. Like those pieces would include things like risk identification, risk categorization, risk remediation, and tracking that throughout their life cycle. And those things can't be done unless you have a very good data flow map. And that can't be done nowadays unless that data flow map is really a truly dynamic and always up-to-date data flow map, which means some integration with the tech stack.
Yeah, and I want to put a pin in a couple things you just said, Timothy, to revisit them. We're going to be talking about data mapping a little bit later on. But to that last point there about dynamic mapping and more kind of dashboard, real-time level viewpoints, replacing things like architectural system diagrams or inventories of IT systems and responsible IT holders. We all, many of us have been through exercises where we've gone through those, and for
I don't think that's out the door. That's the starting point. You still need to. I believe in a zero trust system. Engineers and product teams want to build something. There's going to be some variation in how that's built and how that's maintained over time. And so you just need to have that zero trust check on it on an ongoing basis. I think on the privacy and definitely in the AI space, given how fast that is moving, how fast data is flowing, the old paradigm of I'm going to have a questionnaire for my data inventory happen once or twice a year. That is out the door. It's no longer something that can be considered like a part of a responsible program and framework.
Yeah. No, so really good point, Timothy. And to your point, whereas where I was going to go with that is that when we do those exercises too often, they become static and they they get irrelevant very quickly, because IT owners move, and we have systems change and systems get deprecated and new systems come on board. And so it's important. But to your point, it's an essential initial project, maybe a great way to get started. However, the cadence or frequency with which they get evaluated and updated, it's really critical that cadence gets shorter and that frequency becomes shorter, and that there are dynamic systems out there that can help you update that on the fly and discover shadow IT, for instance, when you're in communication with your IT system holders, et cetera. So that's really critical. Something else I wanted to put a pin in and talk about when you mentioned risk and evaluating risk. So as these AI technologies, tools are being brought into organizations, being implemented by different departments, different arms, different even brands within portfolios of brands, doing risk prioritization is really key. And that's something that we talked about earlier. It might be easy to get overwhelmed with thinking about trying to get your arms around documenting and governing all of this use throughout large organizations. But by doing risk categorization and risk prioritization, whereby you can try to identify the tools that potentially are going to produce the greatest harm to your consumer, your customer, and prioritizing those and putting the emphasis first on those and making sure they're governed well, the right people have access or don't have access, the data is secure within those systems, et cetera, is just really critically important. Sam, I'm sure you have comments on that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as we're talking about this paradigm shift from the yearly survey review of what's happening in the business to a consistent and constant highlighting of what's happening across your data, that ultimately is a way to feed that prioritization of what are the things that are changing. Based on what's changing, who do I need to go ahead and have a conversation with? Maybe there is more follow-up and assessments that need to be done in a certain area. And I think a common thread that we've seen, especially as regulators have been much more forceful in their enforcement action, and plaintiffs' attorneys have been sending out letters to a lot of folks around SEPA violations and VPPA violations. Wiretapping comes into play also. And there's a lot of these things that these regulators, these plaintiffs' attorneys are looking for on websites where they these folks are smart technical folks who have web crawlers, who have different ways they go and analyze the actual network traffic that's happening, various data that's getting collected, and often what we see folks clamoring for is, how do I know if there is any potential issue before I ever get that letter? And how do I ensure that the data that's getting collected on my page is exactly what I expect? How do I know that some vendor hasn't changed their tag to start collecting something different about user behavior data on the page? So there's a lot of these monitoring pieces where often that first thing that comes to mind for a lot of folks is what someone is going to see on their websites or apps that regulators and plaintiffs' attorneys are going to follow up on.
Yeah, and a couple of points on that, Sam. We were talking about this in prepping for the program again. And the good news is there are tools and there are platforms available out there commercially. You can go to privacy or IT security conferences these days and walk along the vendor floor and check out the booths. There are a number of different vendors. Matter of fact, I was talking about an anecdote. I was in a privacy conference in Europe not long ago and got a demo of one of these scanners. And the CEO of the company who was doing the demo was kind of highlighting the fact that they had just sold their tool to a regulator in the United States, and that the regulator was using this tool to scan publicly available websites and look for violations. So people should know that regulators are increasingly becoming tech savvy, and they are out there using those. But on the other side of that, you can also purchase these tools and be able to use these tools and keep dynamic. And I think, Sam, you said, at times, vendors change. I would say let's change that statement to be, it happens all the time, and it's almost more of a given. So I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit and talk about maybe the the importance of, you mentioned CIPA violations that are, lawsuits are proliferating out there. There's been a lot of talk, and we see with our clients a lot of desire for cookie monitoring and trackers on websites and trying to keep up with those. Do either one of you want to kind of comment on the state of play there and what's happening out in the regulation field in terms of how do companies go about, keeping up with the trackers and the cookies, and just, how do you manage that? It's an ongoing dynamic process.
I'll start on the cookie side because I'm passionate about this, where this is out of the early European laws. There was and there still is a large cookie focus, and the conversation has shifted in the last year or two from cookies to data collection events. And the big distinction in my mind there, just putting my engineering hat on here, cookies don't actually collect anything. It's just a storage mechanism on the browser. And the real question is, where is that information from the browser going? Or where is the information from your app going? What is getting collected? What is getting shared with third parties? As ad tech systems get loaded on the page, what other vendors are also brought in? What other things are ushered into the page? And the operational data collection that happens on these websites, there's so much more to the story than cookies. Cookies is like the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And I think more and more folks are having the full conversation around what data is collected, where does that data go, what if that data is sensitive. And of course, cookies and trackers are a piece of that puzzle, but it's part of a much larger story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Timothy, one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking a moment ago about the regulatory landscape out there, it's interesting. Just in the last few months, even, if people are paying attention to kind of what's going on, both here in the United States, in terms of maybe even a pull back from regulation and an encouragement for AI technologies to be accelerated and to move forward with less friction. And then we've even heard news coming over from Europe in terms of relooking at the GDPR and its requirements, and maybe in the EU AI Act eventually, maybe some slight backing off of regulation to encourage these technologies to, as the war kind of heats up between the United States and China in terms of developing these technologies, and a little bit of an arms race going on there. I would say it's important to note for the people on this call who are involved with compliance and governance that this doesn't, maybe a warning to not back off from what will, I think most of us believe, eventually be some more stringent AI regulations put into place at some point. And some of the early things you can do in terms of AI governance are around documentation of just which technologies are being used, what are they being used for, how are they being used, maybe doing some risk rating, and transparency into public communication to your customers, consumers, about how these technologies are being used. Would you agree, Timothy, that kind of transparency and documentation are some early things that companies can do in terms of getting their AI governance program kind of stood up?
Yeah, absolutely. Transparency is always a fundamental core value of all of the governance programs, whether in privacy, security, or in AI. I think at a really high level, we're seeing quite a varied approach to AI regulation around the world. So if you're saying you launch something online and you just target the world at large, there's going to be a really large variety and range of AI regulation that may apply to you. And some countries may have stricter rules and be quite prescriptive. Some countries may have frameworks that really are kind of, we will work with companies and understand what they're doing before we have enforcement and before we come out with more codes of conduct and codes of practices. There's a wide range of how that's working around the world right now, but we are seeing definitely some pullback and some acceleration of the strictness of regulations in the AI space. Yeah. It's often really a good idea to have some sort of codification of policies within your company. So let's say you're on some sort of compliance standard and you're tracking it, and you can translate what applies to you from a certain law into some of those actual codes you have tracked. And so you may have a set for the EU AI Act. You may have a set for South Korea, for the US, for different states in the US. And then you can understand what may apply and then what that means in terms of actual operational practices in the company.
Yeah, it's an important analysis within the company that needs to involve some of the highest levels of leadership in terms of how exactly the company wants to go about its strategy and its risk tolerance in terms of complying. Are we going to go strictest level across the board? Are we going to try to segment out? What are the operational costs involved in that? Sam, I'm sure you see that all the time with Catch clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of folks are just trying to figure out where all this AI legislation is gonna land. And
yeah.
Timothy, as you pointed out, it's privacy regulation moves very fast. AI regulation seems to move even faster. So that's going to continue to evolve. It seems like a lot of the principles just around transparency and documentation is still fundamental to the AI problem as well. And I think there's also another piece of this that relates to some of the fundamental habits that we all have in privacy around data permissioning and data control. Just thinking about the data that's flowing into these AI systems and how you ensure as an organization that is clean permission data that is used to train those models, that is used to prompt those various models. It's a very data intensive use case. And so more and more, it's critical to understand those data flows and ensure that data is permissioned for your AI use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to not only consider what's data or clean data to being ingested by a already trained and functioning model, as well as consider when you're fine-tuning a model. So say you pick up an off-the-shelf model that's available, but you need to fine-tune it for your use in your company. Oftentimes you then train it again with some additional data. And it's really important to make sure that you understand the risks involved with ingestion of that data and training on that data. And ideally, it's clean and it's a binary clean, as Sam mentioned, but sometimes there may be some risk involved because there's kind of a gray area of clean to we definitely should not be using this data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes back to some of the core obligations around any sort of responsible AI governance program. And that pulls for privacy programs as well, which is you're going to be doing a risk assessment. You identify the data flow, you identify the risks, then identify the risk mitigation you're going to attach to those risks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it keeps popping up for me, Timothy, as you were talking about that documentation. And if you want to be have a responsible AI governance program within your organization, documenting these the ingestion models, the states that they're in, the model cards, etc. The more you can do, the more you can kind of put down on paper what models you're using, what versions, et cetera, timestamps, responsible parties, et cetera, is really going to help with being able to rationalize the choices and the risk decisions that are made within the company for what models get used. So, well, yes, were you going to say something else? Yeah.
I was just going to say model and data lineage are key when you're starting to integrate AI tools into your stack.
Yeah, terrific. So, well, we are just about out of time here. We've only got a couple minutes left in our program. So I did want to mention before we drop that if you are by any chance resident in the Bay Area around San Francisco or Silicon Valley and are going to be around in the next couple of weeks on June 25th, we are going to host a live event at the Catch headquarters in downtown San Francisco, an after-hours event where we'll have some cocktails and hors d'oeuvres and some networking and also another panel discussion. Timothy and Sam will both be there and a couple other folks that will be there as well. We're going to post the link to register for that free live event in San Francisco on June 25th in the evening. And if you're in that area, again, please join us down there. And or if you know folks that might be interested in attending, please send the registration link around to them. We'd love to see you there. So with that, I think we'll take us to a program close unless we have any final thoughts or comments. Did anybody want to kind of finish up with any kind of final notes on this?
Just appreciate these conversations as always. It's something I'm excited to keep talking about with this whole group.
Terrific. Thanks, Sam. Yeah.
I have a quick note, which is I think everyone should be thinking about AI as both a risk for your organization as well as an opportunity.
Yeah.
The fact that it can be leveraged in your operational programs and tooling or in other ways, for example, to reach out to your employee base as a whole through agentic AI. I think it's really important to do that because otherwise, the organization as a whole, because of how fast AI and data flows are moving today, is going. You can't hire to make up for the increased workload that's going to happen. So it's important to adopt as well.
You know what, Timothy, I'm really glad that we're ending on that note, because we tend to think in the privacy world of, risks and dangers and harms, but it's a very important balance because, hey, these technologies are here, they're out there, they're getting leveraged. It's important to stay current in the marketplace if you want to be competitive. So it's not don't use it, it's use it, but be aware of how you're using it and trying to set up a structure where you can do your best to govern that usage. So great note to end on. Well, with that, thanks so much, both of you, for your time today. Really appreciate it. Sam and Timothy, sharing some of your experience and expertise with us. And once again, hopefully some of you can join us in San Francisco on June 25th. And with that, I'll take us to a program close. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And I appreciate your taking some time to review the recording.